Hey love bugs, I hope you're enjoying watching your teachers teach from their homes. So as I've been doing, we're just going to jump into reading. So in reading, we're still thinking about historical fiction. You're reading your historical fiction books on Epic, and you're using those reading skills that we've been doing all year, plus ones we're doing now, to really stop and think about what's going on in your story. So let's look at what we're doing today. So today we're looking at characters' perspective. So we've talked about perspective before. So perspective is how a person sees their experiences, sees the world, and has their own point of view. So every person, not just in books, but in life, have had their own experiences and are living at a time where outside things are impacting them. And those outside experiences, those people, those events, those historical moments are impacting every person and every character. So you do not have the same experiences as your friend or your brother or your sister or your cousin or someone who lives down the street or someone who lives in a different state or country. So everyone kind of has their own experiences that go into their perspective. So your characters are the same way. Your characters are written so well by these authors that they have their own backstory. They have their own experiences and their own family that they bring to the story. So we're going to be looking at your character's perspective in your historical fiction book. So as a historical fiction reader, it's important to think about who your character is and what their perspective is, to think about who they are in the story and why they are that way. So they can be influences by their own house, their neighborhood, their state, their country, what's happening in the world, kind of like we are right now, and how that shapes them into who they are and how they're telling the story. So, just like learning about a new person, it's kind of exciting to learn about a new character, and you really get to know who they are, and the reading nerd I am, they kind of feel like a friend for a while. So especially reading about historical fiction, we have to remember that this is not taking place right now. This is taking place in a whole different time period. So thinking about that timeline that you're looking at and how what's going on in history fits in with our person is super important when reading historical fiction. The setting and the time period are super important for you to realize and remember. So it does take a little bit of our imagination to think about, like, what would it really be like during that time? So we can understand our character well enough to understand what they're going through and what they might be feeling, what they might be thinking, and why they're doing the things that they are. So a couple questions to ask yourself while you read your historical fiction book today and every other day are right here on the right. So as you're reading, you can ask yourself, who's telling the story? Whose perspective am I hearing? What side am I hearing from? Another question is, whose point of view does the reader get while reading the story? So especially if you have a main character and you're hearing their perspective and they're traveling with their sibling or they're making a friend, think about what would be different if the other person was telling the story. What would be different if my character's sister was telling the story? What would be different if my character's new friend was telling the story? How would the story be different if someone else was telling it? What makes that my narrator, my main character, what makes their perspective? And the third question is, what do I know about what's happening in history that's explaining why my character is doing that? So we've been talking about timelines and what's going on in history. So what is going on in history that is maybe making my character say these things, do these things, or act that way? So let's take a look at our Read Aloud, The Babe and I. So this is from the first section of The Babe and I. So let's revisit this scene where we're really thinking about that historical aspect and thinking about who our character is, who our narrator is, and why he's saying these things. So there's a couple main points in here that are highlighted. So in this part of the story is where our narrator meets his friend Jacob, and Jacob explains that he has to go to work. So right here where it's highlighted is a quote from Jacob saying he has to go to work. So that helps me realize that Jacob has a job. And thinking about the historical context of it, I can think that Jacob has a job because times are tough and his family might not have a lot of money, and it was helpful and important for kids to have jobs to help their family with money. And I wouldn't have thought that if I thought about the story happening today. That doesn't really happen as much today, especially with such a young kid. That doesn't really happen. So I have to remember that historical timepiece playing into it. So our next highlighted part says that her clothes were wrinkled and shabby. So as our narrator is walking down the street, he notices an apple seller and how her clothes are wrinkled and shabby. And that makes me think about, again, this is happening during the Great Depression, and a lot of people didn't have a lot of money. And she might not have been able to wash her clothes. They might be old clothes, they might be hand-me-downs. And that may be why she is wearing wrinkled and shabby clothes. And in that same line, our narrator gives her his dime that he got for his birthday. He bought 2 apples. I don't know if you've been to the store lately with your parents or with your family, but apples do not cost a dime. So it makes me think about how much things cost during that time period. The price of items were so low. You could not even buy 1 apple with a dime anymore, let alone 2 apples. So it's another way that I'm thinking about that history and how that's impacting my story. And then in this last highlighted part is when our narrator realizes that his dad is selling apples on the side of the road. And he's confused, and Jacob says to him, "I thought your dad had a job." And our narrator responds, "So did I. Mom thinks so too." So again, thinking about the Great Depression and how hard it was for people to work and make money, I realized that a lot of people lost their job, and our narrator is one of them. So thinking a lot about what was going on in that time period. I'm thinking about my narrator's perspective. My narrator's a young boy at this time who loves his family and wants to do well for his family. So you've listened to the rest of it. You'll see where this develops, and we'll keep reading and we'll keep thinking about how that impacts our character. Is his want and need to help his family struggle with money. He wants to help his family make more money and be able to live a happy life. So I thought about some historical things. I thought about what my character might be feeling, what my character might be thinking, all to really strengthen my understanding of this book and understanding of the time period. So that's what you guys are going to do today. So in your own historical fiction books, you're going to read a little bit more. You're going to read 15 to 20 minutes of your book, and you're going to think about some of the questions that we thought about with The Babe and I. You're going to think about why your character is acting some way, and when your character acts differently and you're in an unexpected way, stop and think to yourself, why are they doing that? Maybe if your character does something that like you would never do, maybe it's different for them. Maybe that time period is playing a part in that. So why would they be doing that? What's impacting their decisions? So think about what your character's thinking and feeling at that time period, and that will help drive you in your response and in your thoughts. So on this next slide, and the last slide, you're going to think about why your character acts the way they do, what's happening around them. So you can think about it in terms of history, you can think about it in terms of their family. What in their lives is causing them to think and do things that way? What do you know about your character and about the story that's impacting their decisions? So write it on this last slide. Good luck. Happy reading. See you soon.